The Nevada desert stretched endlessly before me as our unmarked black helicopter descended toward what appeared to be nothing but sand and rock formations. I'd been briefed about Fort Blackwood, but nothing prepared me for the reality of it. As we dropped lower, massive hangar doors ground open in the desert floor, revealing a gaping entrance large enough to swallow our helicopter whole. "Welcome to your new home, Private Stone," the pilot's voice crackled through my headset. It was the first words anyone had spoken to me in 3 hours. The underground facility swallowed us into its depths, the hangar doors sealing shut above with an ominous finality that sent a chill down my spine. The landing pad was surrounded by armed guards in unmarked black tactical gear, their faces obscured by tinted visors. This wasn't like any military base I'd seen before, and I'd seen plenty during my time as an Army Ranger. A tall man in a pristine military uniform approached as I stepped out of the helicopter. The insignia identified him as Colonel Frank Harris, though his name had been mentioned multiple times in my briefing documents. His face was weathered, with hard eyes that seemed to be evaluating every movement I made. "Private Mark Stone," he said, extending his hand. His grip was iron tight. "Your record is impressive. Top of your class in Rangers training, exceptional physical condition, and most importantly," he paused, his eyes boring into mine, "you follow orders without question." "Yes, sir," I responded, keeping my voice steady despite the growing unease in my gut. "Follow me," Harris commanded, turning sharply on his heel. We passed through a series of security checkpoints, each more rigorous than the last. Retinal scanners, fingerprint readers, full-body biomedical scans. The level of security seemed extreme even for a classified facility. The colonel led me deeper into the facility, down pristine white corridors that seemed to stretch for miles. "Fort Blackwood is home to the Biological Defense Initiative," he explained as we walked. "BDI is developing the next generation of military enhancement protocols. What we're doing here will revolutionize warfare as we know it." We passed by a reinforced window, looking into a state-of-the-art laboratory. Inside, scientists in hazmat suits worked with equipment I'd never seen before. One of them looked up, a woman with intelligent eyes visible behind her face shield. She gave Colonel Harris a knowing nod. "That's Dr. Lisa Wells, our lead virologist," Harris said. "You'll be working closely with her team." The word virologist made me pause mid-step. My briefing hadn't mentioned anything about viruses. We came to another security checkpoint, this one requiring both Harris's and my biometric data to pass through. Beyond it lay a corridor lined with what looked like medical isolation rooms. Each had a reinforced window, but most were covered with privacy screens. "This is where you'll be staying," Harris said, stopping at an empty room. "You're part of Test Group Alpha. There are 7 other subjects in your group, all specially selected like yourself. Dr. Wells will begin your intake processing in 1 hour." Before I could ask any of the dozens of questions swimming in my mind, a new voice joined us. "Colonel, we have the latest results from Group Charlie." I turned to see Staff Sergeant Tom Reed approaching, holding a tablet computer. His face was grim. "Excuse me, Private," Harris said, stepping aside with Reed. Their voices dropped to whispers, but I caught fragments. "Complete organ failure, 3rd one this month, running out of time." A scream echoed from somewhere deep in the facility, cutting off abruptly. Harris and Reed didn't even flinch. "Get settled in, Private," Harris called over his shoulder as he walked away with Reed. "Dr. Wells will be here soon. And Stone," he paused, looking back at me, "remember what you signed, every word of it." I stepped into my new room, hearing the door lock behind me with a heavy click. The space was sparse. A bed, a desk, a bathroom behind a partial wall. A single camera watched from the corner. On the desk lay a tablet displaying a medical questionnaire and a schedule for the next 24 hours. The first item on the schedule made my blood run cold. 0800 Initial Virus Integration Procedure. I walked to the window, placing my hand against the cool glass. Across the hall, a privacy screen retracted briefly as a nurse exited one of the rooms. In the split second before it closed again, I saw the occupant, or what was left of him. The man was strapped to his bed, his skin covered in dark veins that seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm. His eyes met mine, and in them I saw nothing human remaining. The privacy screen snapped back into place, but the image was burned into my mind. What had I really signed up for? And more importantly, was it too late to back out? Looking down at my tablet, I noticed my hands were trembling slightly. The questionnaires' first question glowed mockingly. Do you have any family history of adverse reactions to experimental medical procedures? Somewhere in the facility, another scream echoed. This time, it didn't stop. The door hissed open exactly 1 hour later. Dr. Lisa Wells entered, accompanied by 2 nurses in full protective gear. Her white lab coat was immaculate, clipboard tucked under one arm, but dark circles under her eyes betrayed her exhaustion. Private Stone, she said, her voice carrying a warmth that seemed out of place in the sterile facility. I've reviewed your physical results from the Rangers. Impressive, but today's tests will go much deeper. She gestured to the nurses who began unpacking equipment from cases I hadn't noticed them carrying. Doctor, I started, trying to keep my voice steady. What exactly is Project Chimera? My briefing was limited. She studied me for a moment before answering. It's the next evolution in military enhancement. Imagine a virus that could rewrite human DNA, creating soldiers who are stronger, faster, more resilient. Soldiers who could heal from almost any wound, who could operate without sleep for days. And the screams we keep hearing. Previous test groups, she replied, her expression hardening slightly. The path to progress isn't always smooth, Private, but Group Alpha is different. We've refined the virus, solved the problems that plagued earlier versions. Your group was specifically chosen for genetic markers that should ensure compatibility. The nurses had finished setting up their equipment. One was preparing a series of syringes filled with an iridescent blue liquid that seemed to move on its own. The other was attaching electrodes to various monitoring devices. I need to show you something before we begin, Dr. Wells said, pulling up a video on her tablet. This is from last week's successful test. The footage showed a man in a testing chamber. As I watched, he lifted what must have been thousands of pounds with ease. He moved at incredible speeds, his reflexes far beyond human norm. His wounds inflicted under controlled conditions, Dr. Wells assured me, healed almost instantly. That's the potential of Project Chimera, she said proudly. Of course, he was only a partial success. The virus's effects began degrading after 48 hours. But your group, she smiled, your group will be different. The nurses approached with their equipment. One began attaching electrodes to my chest and temples while the other prepared my arm for injection. I should warn you, Dr. Wells continued, the integration process is unpleasant. Your body will fight the virus at first. The pain will be extreme, but if you survive the first 24 hours, you'll be part of history. If I survive, I asked, watching the nurse tap the syringe of blue liquid. We've had some candidates who weren't as compatible as their genetics suggested, but your profile is the closest match we've ever seen. Colonel Harris has high hopes for you, specifically. A commotion in the hallway interrupted her. Through the window, I saw medical personnel rushing past. Pushing a gurney, the patient was convulsing violently, his skin rippling as if something moved beneath it. Dr. Wells frowned at the distraction. Group Charlie, she muttered. Always unpredictable. She nodded to the nurse with the syringe. Begin the procedure. The needle slid into my arm. The liquid burned like fire as it entered my bloodstream. Almost immediately, my vision began to blur. Remember, Private Stone, Dr. Wells's voice seemed to come from very far away. Fight through the pain, embrace the change, and whatever you hear, whatever you see in the next few hours, don't let it break you. The burning spread through my entire body. My back arched involuntarily as the first wave of real pain hit. Through rapidly dimming vision, I saw Dr. Wells making notes on her clipboard. Vital signs elevated but within expected parameters, she dictated to one of the nurses. Subject showing typical initial response. Begin monitoring phase 1 integration. The pain reached my brain, and the world exploded into fragments of light and shadow. The last thing I heard before consciousness fled was Dr. Wells' voice. "Welcome to Project Chimera, Private Stone. Let's see what you become." The pain lasted for what felt like years. My sense of time shattered as waves of agony rolled through my body. I saw impossible colors and heard sounds that human ears shouldn't be able to perceive. My skin felt like it was being peeled away one layer at a time, while my bones seemed to dissolve and reform with each heartbeat. Through the haze of torment, I caught fragments of conversation. Temperature holding at 104.6. Remarkable adaptation at the cellular level. Better results than previous subjects. Cognitive function still intact. I faded in and out of consciousness, each moment of clarity bringing new horrors. During one lucid period, I saw my reflection in the window. My eyes had turned a brilliant, unnatural gold. During another, I watched as a cut from an IV needle sealed itself instantly, leaving no scar. The first full memory I have after the injection is of waking up to find Colonel Harris staring down at me, Dr. Wells at his side. My mind felt crystal clear, my body humming with energy I'd never felt before. "How long?" I managed to ask, my voice surprisingly strong. 36 hours, Dr. Wells replied, checking readings on her tablet. "You're the first subject to maintain consciousness through most of the integration process. Quite remarkable." I sat up, marveling at how easy it felt. The room had been reinforced while I was out, the windows now covered with thick steel shutters, additional restraints added to the bed I hadn't needed. "How do you feel?" Colonel Harris asked, his eyes intense. "Strong," I answered truthfully. "Different." I could hear conversations from rooms away, smell the antiseptic burn of the medical supplies in sealed containers. Every sensation was heightened to an almost overwhelming degree. "Stand up," Harris ordered. Slowly, I complied, noticing how my muscles responded with perfect precision. No weakness, no trembling despite the long hours of seizures and trauma. "Incredible," Dr. Wells breathed, watching as I stretched. No signs of cellular degradation. Perfect integration at every level. She turned to Harris. "We did it. We finally did it." A commotion in the hallway drew our attention. Staff Sergeant Reed burst in, his face pale. "Sir, we have a situation in Lab 7. Anderson from Group Charlie. He's awake." Harris's expression darkened. "Anderson's been comatose for a week. What happened?" He started seizing, then his vitals went crazy. When the medical team tried to stabilize him, Reed swallowed hard. "He killed 3 of them, sir. Tore through the restraints like they were paper. His cellular structure is mutating faster than anything we've seen. Dr. Phillips is still trapped in there with him." "Impossible," Dr. Wells whispered. "Group Charlie's virus strain was terminated. They should all be brain dead." An inhuman roar echoed through the facility, followed by the sound of rending metal. "Stone," Harris snapped. "Time to test your new capabilities. Reed, get him tactical gear. Dr. Wells, initiate containment protocols." He drew his sidearm, checking the magazine. "Let's see what our success story can do against our failures." As Reed rushed me to the armory, I heard more screams. Not of pain this time, but of rage. The facility's lights flickered, emergency sirens beginning to wail. Through it all, I could smell something new, a deep, primal scent of wrong that made my enhanced senses recoil. Something was loose in Fort Blackwood, something that should never have existed, and I had a terrible feeling that Anderson was just the beginning. The armory door slid open, revealing racks of weapons I'd never seen before. "Experimental prototypes," Reed explained, handing me what looked like a heavily modified rifle, designed specifically to handle problems like this. "What exactly did the virus do to Anderson?" I asked, checking the weapon's unusual ammunition. Reed's face was grim. "You're about to find out. And Stone," he grabbed my arm. "If you see anyone from Group Charlie, don't hesitate. They're not human anymore. They probably never will be again." The lights went out completely, emergency generators humming to life. In the red glow of the backup lighting, I could hear something moving through the facility's ventilation system. Something big. The metal walls groaned as if under enormous pressure. Movement in Sector 5, a voice crackled over the intercom. Multiple containment breaches. God help us. They're working together. I chambered around in my new weapon, my enhanced muscles easily handling its weight. Somewhere ahead of us, metal screamed as it was torn apart, and a new sound echoed through the corridors. The sound of something hungry. Reed and I moved through the facility's red-lit corridors, our footsteps eerily silent despite our speed. My enhanced senses picked up details I would have missed before. The subtle vibrations in the walls, the change in air pressure as something large moved nearby, the metallic tang of blood in the air. We found the first bodies outside Lab 7, 3 security guards, their tactical gear shredded like tissue paper. The wounds didn't look like anything made by human hands. The walls were dented outward, as if something had exploded from within the lab. Anderson was a desk analyst before this, Reed whispered, checking the ammunition in his weapon. 140 pounds soaking wet, no combat experience. A wet, slithering sound came from above. In the ventilation duct, something massive shifted its weight. The metal bulged outward, rivets popping free one by one. Move. I shoved Reed forward as the duct exploded. A shape dropped into the corridor, humanoid but wrong in every possible way. It must have been Anderson, but he'd grown to nearly 8 feet tall, his skin translucent and rippling with mutated muscle. His jaw had split into 4 parts, each lined with razor-sharp teeth. But his eyes were the worst part. They were still human, filled with awareness and agony. My enhanced reflexes kicked in as he lunged. Time seemed to slow. I could see every detail of his movement, predict his trajectory. The experimental rifle came up smoothly, and I fired. The rounds were some kind of high-tech armor-piercing incendiary. They tore through Anderson's mutated flesh, leaving burning blue trails. He screamed, a sound that existed somewhere between human and animal, and slammed into the wall instead of us. His flesh seemed to ripple and reform, trying to heal the wounds. The virus makes them nearly immortal, Reed gasped, firing his own weapon. You have to destroy the brainstem or they keep coming. Anderson charged again, but now I could track his movements. My body responded with impossible speed, dodging his massive claws. I could feel the virus enhancement working, making me stronger, faster, more lethal with each passing second. Part of me reveled in it, and that realization terrified me more than Anderson's mutations. The fight carried us through the facility's winding corridors. Anderson was incredibly strong, but unfocused, running on rage and instinct. I was faster, my military training amplified by the virus, but he wouldn't stay down. Every wound healed within seconds. We ended up in a large testing chamber. Equipment lay scattered and broken across the floor. And we weren't alone. 3 more figures emerged from the shadows. More Group Charlie survivors, each mutated in their own horrific way. One had split into 2 connected torsos. Another's skin had become translucent, internal organs visible and grotesquely modified. Stone, Dr. Wells's voice came over my tactical radio. The virus adapts to trauma. The more you wound them, the stronger they become. We're seeing some kind of accelerated evolution. You need to end this fast. The mutations were spreading visibly now. Anderson's flesh rippled and bulged, new appendages trying to form. The other infected moved to surround us, showing terrifying coordination. Status report. Colonel Harris barked over the radio. 4 hostiles, I responded, backing toward a better defensive position, heavily mutated, showing signs of tactical coordination. Sir, they're getting smarter. Impossible, Dr. Wells cut in. The virus should have destroyed higher brain functions by now, unless... She fell silent for a moment. Oh God, they're forming a hive mind. The virus is networking them together. As if to confirm her words, all 4 infected moved in perfect synchronization. They weren't just coordinating, they were thinking as one entity. Anderson's human eyes fixed on me with terrible recognition. Private Stone, he spoke, his ruined mouth somehow forming words. We can feel you. The virus sings in your blood too. Join us. Evolution is beautiful. Target the environmental controls, Harris commanded. Extreme temperatures slow their regeneration. I noted the liquid nitrogen tanks along the wall, part of the facility's cooling system. One good shot would flood the chamber with freezing gas. But before I could act, alarms blared throughout the facility. Multiple breaches in Sector 7, a panicked voice announced. Group Beta showing similar mutations. Containment failing. Dear God, they're in the ventilation system. They're everywhere. The infected creatures tensed, ready to pounce. I could feel something scratching at the edges of my mind. The virus trying to connect me to their shared consciousness. My enhanced senses picked up more movement in the halls beyond. Dozens of signatures. The infection was spreading. New orders. Harris's voice was grim. Fall back to the command center. Dr. Wells thinks she knows what went wrong. We're initiating Protocol Omega. What's Protocol Omega? I asked, already knowing I wouldn't like the answer. There was a long pause before Harris responded. The complete purge of Fort Blackwood. May God help us all. I didn't waste time. One shot to the liquid nitrogen tanks created the diversion we needed. The chamber filled with freezing gas as Reed and I bolted for the exit. Behind us, the infected creatures howled in rage and pain, their movements slowing in the extreme cold. But we weren't safe, not even close. The facility had descended into hell. Emergency bulkheads were dropping randomly as systems failed. The ventilation system groaned with movement, infected soldiers crawling through like a virus through veins. Twice we had to change routes as we encountered scenes of carnage. Security teams torn apart. Scientists transformed mid-escape into horrific new forms. My enhanced hearing picked up snippets of chaos through the facility's failing communications system. Beta Wing completely overrun. Mutation rate accelerating exponentially. They're breaking into the mainframe. Lost contact with surface control. The virus in my blood felt alive, aware. Each time we encountered an infected, I could feel it trying to reach out, to connect. Their shared consciousness was like a dark ocean beating against the shores of my mind. We found Dr. Wells halfway to the command center, barricaded in a security office with 3 surviving security officers. Her lab coat was stained with blood, her tablet cracked but still functional. The virus, she said as soon as we secured the room, it's not just changing them physically, it's evolving their consciousness, merging them into something new, a collective intelligence that grows more sophisticated with each person it adds to its network. You said you knew what went wrong, Reed reminded her, reloading his weapon with shaking hands. Dr. Wells' face was ashen. Project Chimera wasn't just about enhancing soldiers. The virus was engineered from dozens of different strains, including some we found in classified locations. She pulled up files on her tablet. Look at this. 3 months ago, they found something in the Arctic ice, a prehistoric virus perfectly preserved. That's when everything changed. Colonel Harris ordered it integrated into the program. The timing matches the first Group Charlie trials, Reed said. The ancient virus had capabilities we'd never seen before. It could rewrite DNA on the fly, adapt to any countermeasure. We thought we could control it, use it to accelerate our results. She laughed bitterly. We were wrong. The old virus was sentient in its own way, and now it's learning, networking its hosts, building something bigger. A massive impact shook the facility. Through my enhanced hearing, I could make out the sound of massive forms moving through the lower levels, like something out of a nightmare. Group Charlie was just the beginning, Dr. Wells continued. The virus preserves the host's intelligence while transforming their body. Each person it takes makes the collective smarter, more adaptable. They're not just coordinating now, they're evolving as a single organism. The security feeds showed chaos spreading through every level. The infected were changing, mutations becoming more extreme. Some had merged together into impossible forms. Others showed signs of entirely new biological structures. And they were all moving with purpose, converging on specific points in the facility. They're trying to reach the surface, I realized. If even one of them gets out, It gets worse, Dr. Wells interrupted, showing us new data on her tablet. The virus is airborne now. The environmental systems are contaminated. Anyone still human in this facility has already been exposed. We're all infected. It's just a matter of time before the changes begin. But Stone's different, Reed pointed out. He's infected but still human. Why? His genetic markers. Dr. Wells mused, studying me with new intensity. The virus bonded differently with his DNA. Instead of overwhelming his consciousness, it enhanced it. He might be the key to fighting this if we had more time. She was cut off by another explosion that rocked the facility. No time, Harris's voice crackled over the radio. They've breached the inner security cordons. Protocol Omega is our only option now. Get to the command center. We have 10 minutes before I initiate the purge sequence. What exactly is Protocol Omega? I demanded. Dr. Wells's answer chilled me to the bone. The facility's reactor was built with a fatal flaw by design. In case of total containment failure, it can be triggered to go critical. The explosion will be thorough. Nothing will survive. Not us, not the infected, not even the virus itself. A new sound echoed through the facility. A deep, resonant call that made the virus in my blood sing with recognition. Through the security feeds, we watched in horror as the infected responded. They were coordinating for something big. They know, Dr. Wells whispered. The collective knows what we're planning, and it's not going to let us reach that command center without a fight. The lights failed completely, plunging us into darkness broken only by emergency strips. In that moment, I could feel them. Hundreds of minds joined as one, focusing their shared will on a single goal: survival, evolution, expansion. And we were all that stood in their way. We moved as one unit through the darkened facility, each of us knowing our survival counted in minutes now. My enhanced senses proved invaluable. I could detect the infected's movements through walls, hear their coordinated breathing, smell their altered biochemistry. 3 levels to the command center, Reed whispered, though I could hear his heart pounding. The main elevators are down. We'll have to take the maintenance shafts. The security officers formed a tight formation around Dr. Wells. Her tablet provided the only reliable map of the facility's maintenance routes. The infected had somehow crashed the main systems. They were learning, adapting, using their collective intelligence in terrifying new ways. We reached the first maintenance shaft without incident. Too easily, my enhanced instincts screamed a warning. Wait. I grabbed Reed's arm as he reached for the access panel. Listen. In the silence, we could hear it, a subtle movement in the shaft. Not the heavy sounds of the larger mutations, but something else, something waiting. I ripped the panel off instead of opening it normally. Inside, clustered like a nightmare insect colony, were dozens of small, mutated creatures. They had once been rats from the facility's labs, now transformed by the virus into killing machines the size of cats, with too many legs and crystalline growths for armor. They launched themselves at us in perfect coordination. My enhanced reflexes kicked in as I fired, each shot finding its mark. The security officers opened up with their weapons, filling the corridor with deafening sound. But the creatures kept coming. They're hurting us, Dr. Wells shouted over the gunfire. The collective is using them to force us down another path. She was right. Our only escape route was a side corridor, exactly where the hive mind wanted us to go, but we had no choice. New plan, I said, tossing a grenade into the mass of mutated rats. We go up through biology. Biology, one of the security officers protested. That's where Group Beta was housed. Exactly, I replied. They won't expect us to go through their strongest point. They'll be focused on cutting off our safer routes. The logic was sound, but the reality was a nightmare. Biology had become a landscape of horror. The infected had transformed the entire floor into something organic. The walls pulsed with grown biomass, floor slick with substances I didn't want to identify. Tendrils of mutated tissue reached for us as we passed. The virus is building something, Dr. Wells observed, her scientific curiosity somehow intact. It's not just changing people anymore, it's creating a completely new ecosystem. Less observing, more running, Reed urged. We were halfway through biology when we saw it. The thing that had once been Dr. Phillips, the scientist trapped with Anderson during the initial outbreak. The virus had transformed him into something that barely fit in the high-ceilinged laboratory. Multiple limbs, each ending in wicked bone blades, supported a body that was more like living architecture than anything natural. His head had split and reformed into something like a crown of sensory organs. Beautiful, isn't it? The thing spoke with Phillips's voice, but layered with hundreds of others, the voice of the collective. This is true evolution, the next step for humanity. Why fight it? Behind him, more infected emerged. Scientists, soldiers, and things that had once been both, now merged and transformed beyond recognition. They moved in perfect synchronization, like cells in a larger organism. The collective remembers you, Dr. Wells, Phillips continued. Your work made this possible. Join us. See what your virus can really do. My virus. Dr. Wells stepped forward, horrified recognition on her face. No, what did you do? The Arctic strain wasn't ready for integration. The cellular degradation was exactly what we needed. A new voice joined in. Colonel Harris stepped into view from a side door, his skin already showing signs of mutation. Dark veins pulsed across his face, eyes beginning to transform. You knew, Dr. Wells accused. You knew the Arctic strain was conscious, that it would try to assume control. Of course I knew, Harris smiled, his teeth now sharp and metallic. Did you really think this was about making better soldiers? The militaries had the site in the Arctic under observation for decades. We knew what the virus could do, its potential for directed evolution. Project Chimera wasn't about enhancing humanity, it was about controlled extinction, about what comes next. I raised my weapon, but Harris was faster than he should have been, even partially transformed. He knocked the gun away and seized my throat with inhuman strength. You feel it, don't you, Stone? He growled. The potential in your blood. You could be so much more than human. Join us willingly. Help us guide the change. The virus in my blood sang in response to his words. The collective consciousness pressed against my mind, offering visions of power, of transcendence beyond mere humanity. For a moment I wavered. Then I saw movement behind Harris Reed, silently positioning himself. I kept Harris talking. What comes next? I asked. After you change everyone, what then? Evolution without limit. Harris's transformed face split in a terrible smile. The virus doesn't just change bodies, it preserves memories, skills, knowledge. Imagine humanity's collective knowledge and experience united in a single, ever-evolving consciousness. No more war, no more division. Perfect unity. Unity, I echoed, seeing Reed take aim. Like this. I drove my knee into Harris's midsection, enhanced strength against enhanced strength. At the same moment, Reed fired. The specialized rounds tore through Harris and into the biomass behind him. The effect was immediate. The organic growth began to spasm, the collective consciousness screaming through every transformed throat. The neural node, Dr. Wells shouted. They've networked themselves through the biomass. Destroy it, and we can reach the command center. What followed was chaos. Every infected being converged on our position as Reed and I fired into the pulsing walls. Dr. Wells guided our shots, her knowledge of viral neural structures proving invaluable. The security officers held off the swarm of smaller mutations trying to overwhelm us. The biomass began to burn as our specialized ammunition did its work. The infected screamed in harmony, a sound that rattled the facility's foundations. Through my enhanced senses, I could feel the collective consciousness fracturing, losing cohesion. Run, I ordered, firing my last rounds into the neural cluster. Head for the command center, now. We ran through burning corridors of flesh, pursued by the maddened infected now acting on pure instinct rather than coordinated intelligence. The virus in my blood felt the collective's pain, tried to drag me back, but I fought through it. The command center was just ahead. We had less than 2 minutes until Protocol Omega initiated, and behind us, in the biomass transformed halls of Fort Blackwood, something massive was stirring, the collective's last, desperate attempt to preserve itself. The final confrontation was about to begin. We reached the command center with seconds to spare, sealing the reinforced doors behind us. The facility's brain was a massive room filled with screens and control stations. Most showed static now, but a few still displayed security feeds of the horror below. 1 minute to protocol Omega initiation. An automated voice announced, "Please enter authorization codes." Dr. Wells rushed to the main console, her fingers flying over the keys. The virus is trying to access the system through the facility's network. I need to isolate the command center's computers. A thunderous impact shook the blast doors. Through my enhanced vision, I could see the metal beginning to warp. "They're merging," I reported, watching the security feeds, all of them, coming together into something else. The cameras showed it happening. Every infected being, every scrap of biomass, every transformed creature was flowing together like living mercury. The collective was making one final play for survival, creating something that should never have existed in our reality. 45 seconds to protocol Omega initiation. Another impact. The blast doors screamed in protest. Reed and the 2 remaining security officers took up defensive positions, weapons trained on the entrance. "Harris planned this from the start," Dr. Wells spoke as she worked. "The Arctic virus wasn't just conscious, it was patient. Waiting in the ice for millions of years, evolving, planning. All it needed was a way to spread." Her voice broke, and I gave it the perfect delivery system. 30 seconds to protocol Omega initiation. The thing outside had finished forming. The security feeds showed it just before they failed completely, a mountain of twisted flesh and metal, an impossible fusion of every infected being in the facility. At its core, visible through translucent tissue, was a cluster of human faces, all moving in sync. Harris was at the center, his features now barely recognizable. The blast doors gave way with a shriek of torn metal. What came through them defied description. It flowed like liquid but moved like a predator, its surface rippling with half-formed faces and limbs. Thousands of eyes blinked at us in perfect unison. 20 seconds to protocol Omega initiation. "The override codes aren't working," Dr. Wells shouted. "Harris must have changed them." The security officers opened fire, their specialized rounds tearing chunks from the monster. But it simply reabsorbed the damaged tissue, growing stronger with each wound. Reed was grabbed by a whipping tendril and pulled into the mass, his scream cutting off as he was absorbed. 15 seconds. The thing that had been Harris spoke through 100 mouths. "Did you think we wouldn't plan for this? The collective cannot be stopped. Evolution cannot be denied." I felt the virus in my blood surge, trying to pull me toward the mass. My enhanced muscles trembled with the effort of resistance. Through the connection, I could feel the collective's thoughts, its plans to spread across the world, to absorb all of humanity into its ever-growing consciousness. 10 seconds. The reactor controls. Dr. Wells pointed to a separate console. "They're hardwired. If we can trigger them manually." She never finished the sentence. A tendril of biomass speared through her chest, lifting her into the air. But even as she died, Dr. Wells smiled. Her hand had already hit the manual override. 5 seconds. The thing howled with 1,000 voices, realizing too late what was happening. It lunged for me, but my enhanced body responded one last time. I dove through its grasping tendrils, rolling to the reactor controls. "Protocol Omega requires final authorization," the computer announced. The collective reached for me with Harris's transformed face. "Join us or die." "How about both?" I snarled, and slammed my fist down on the activation switch. The world turned white. I remember fragments after that. Heat beyond imagining, the collective's final scream, the sensation of falling as Fort Blackwood's lower levels collapsed, the virus in my blood burning away as the reactor's radiation flooded everything. I shouldn't have survived. The doctors at the quarantine facility can't explain how I did. They've run every test imaginable, trying to understand why I'm the only one who walked away from the Fort Blackwood incident, how I survived the radiation, the collapse, the virus itself. They don't know about the dreams, about the whispers I still hear in my blood. The virus burned away, yes, but it changed something in me first. Made me into something not quite human, but not like them either. Something new. And sometimes, in those dreams, I hear the Arctic virus calling. Patient, waiting, planning. Evolution cannot be denied, but maybe it can be guided, and maybe that's why I survived. Because something worse is still out there, frozen in the ice, waiting to be found. And when it is, humanity will need someone who understands what it truly means to evolve.